Ever work with someone who seems like they go from all in to all out almost like overnight? Or maybe you've noticed maybe one of your teammates who takes feedback really personally and gets super sensitive when there's any changes at work. Maybe you've wondered, like, what's actually going on here? Am I missing something? So, today we're going to talk about how to recognize and support any colleagues who may have traits of borderline personality disorder or BPD in the workplace without falling into giving judgment or labeling stuff. My goal here is not to diagnose anyone. It's really just to build some understanding and give you some tools that you can handle some of those tricky and emotional work situations in a way that's really just kind of healthy for everybody. So let's start with what borderline personality disorder actually means. Not from a textbook definition, right? But just in real life. BPD is a diagnosable mental health condition that affects how people really they see themselves, their relationships, how they relate to others, and handle honestly just really strong emotions within. And clinicians look for certain patterns, right? Again, going into DSM criteria here, but I want to give explanations for each one. So, what's the first one? Frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. So let's say you have this coworker that they just get extremely anxious if their manager is just slow to respond, or they're left out of a meeting, or something happens by accident. So you might see them become really intense with their check ins. They might need a lot of reassurance for whatever reason, in those scenarios. Just more than maybe what a typical scenario, that a typical situation might warrant. Number two, unstable and intense relationships swinging between extremes. So someone might praise another coworker as the best one week, and then after a disagreement the next week, they're impossible to work with. The shifts happen so quickly, it can really feel very dramatic to other people. Number three, identity disturbance, unstable self image or sense of self. An employee, let's say they just go from feeling like a really good performer to a complete failure, sometimes within the same day. They question their role that they play, if they're doing a good job, their value, or even career path um, after they get some kind of feedback or encounter some kind of negativity. This is definitely something that can happen to most people, but again, we're still talking about extremes here. It might just be a little bit more comparative to, let's say, other folks. So the next one, impulsivity in potentially self-damaging ways. All right, so you might see somebody, let's say they just get really upset and they just sent this angry email, or they say, "I'm gonna just quit," right? Whenever they're in the middle of something, or they overshare personal information and then regret it later. And then it feels like this roller coaster. They'll put in their 2 weeks and then the next day they're going to stay at their job. And you're like, well, didn't you just say you were going to leave? All right. So those kind of situations can happen. Okay. The next one is it's really marked by the reactivity of mood, right? So you have these intense emotional shifts, big reactions to what would normally be everyday stress. Like a canceled meeting could be, just a canceled meeting, but this could be, dealt with in anger or frustration, tears. Like a small compliment might kind of get more excitement than normal. Moods can shift just so quickly and in response to interactions that, otherwise would be notated as just kind of normal. All right, the next one, chronic feelings of emptiness. So you might have this coworker that just they express boredom or disconnection, or say that nothing feels right at work, nothing matters, even when things seem to be going pretty well. It's just that perpetuation of that negativity towards self. Okay, and then the last one here, inappropriate, intense anger or trouble controlling their anger and frustration. So you have frequent irritability, snappy remarks, whatever, visibility. They are visibly frustrated, let's say in a meeting or something, right? Now, this could happen to everybody, but again, this is just we're talking about extremes here. So it might seem just really out of proportion to what's really going on and just can be followed by like regret or shame, like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have did that. I completely overreacted. But then that happens literally like all the time. Okay, so what the key is here though is that not everybody who shows these behaviors has borderline personality disorder, and not everyone with BPD shows all of them or in the same way. There's a lot of variations. Okay, so here's the thing. As a coworker or manager, you don't have to diagnose. You just have to notice the patterns and know that they might come from a place of real struggle, not necessarily just bad intentions, right? This is not necessarily a horrible, bad person. This is a person who just really struggles from a different place and with different in different ways than other people may. But let's get a real life example. Imagine you work at a really busy hair salon, super popular, things are, really popping every day. Here's what you might see with someone who might have some borderline personality traits. Maybe one week you have this coworker who is your biggest supporter. They're super chatty, they're always coming to your office, they bring you coffee, your favorite Starbucks, whatever, and they're hyping you up to your people. The next week, after you have this, let's say like a little scheduling issue or something, something maybe that's more minor, they pull away. They feel maybe hurt, cold, they act like you're out to get them for some reason, right? Or maybe you notice that they just often check in with you right after every client leaves. Did I do okay today? Did I do a good job? Did I mess up that color? When really everything went fine and they're very capable. Or maybe a client cancels and they take it really personally, like they feel rejected and they say, oh, I'm the worst person in the world. It affects their whole day and just completely ruins the mood. Or maybe they get some feedback from the owner of the shop and they just get completely irrational, possibly, or angry, frustrated, or here's another thing, right? This is not a sign of bad character. These are very outward signs that someone's struggling very, very intense emotions, very painful emotions beneath the surface. So, what could it look like in other workplaces, right? It can show up as like a teammate who's really excited and engaged one day and distant the next. That can be common. Or it may be someone who needs a lot of reassurance after some small changes. Or, they get deeply hurt by what seems to be this very minor um, comment, circumstance, like just it is amplified 10,000%. Really quickly, I have to say this. Just some quick tidbits. People with borderline personality, they feel every emotion like it might be 10,000%, right? They worry about being left out, abandoned, um, even when things may be changing or shifting that's completely outside of their control or your control or anyone's control, right? They may go one week and love you. They may kind of switch and the next week then there's just this drama that you can't put any words to even, right? They might read this short email and feel like they're being intentionally just rejected. Again, these are common traits that a lot of people can struggle with, but again, I want to reemphasize here that it's the extremes that we're talking about. And that we're looking for patterns as well. This is not just someone who has a bad week. This is someone who has a bad week like every other week or something like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be every other week, but that's why it's important not to necessarily label. You don't want to go up to this person and say, "Oh, you have BPD." That's not going to end well. That's not the goal with what I'm saying here. If you can recognize some of these things, then you can approach the situation from a different perspective. So, what are some things that you can actually do here? If you notice, let's say this coworker has been extra sensitive or just gets really upset with feedback, what can you do? So instead of thinking, oh, they're just dramatic, they're just all about the drama, this must be them being a certain type of way. No, right? You can actually just tell yourself this is probably a really hard situation for them. Like you can actually tell them that. I can see this is really upsetting for you. That would probably go pretty well with them. Make sure that you can just have some empathy towards them here. You're not trying to analyze, you're just trying to be empathetic. The next thing, set clear kind boundaries. Compassion doesn't have to mean you tolerate the yelling or any gossip or anything, but it can be something like, hey, I really want to work with you on this, but I'm going to come back and talk to you when things kind of calm down a little bit. Another thing to really look out for: avoid team splitting. Don't get pulled into the gossip or take sides. Have empathy, be intentional with your boundaries. Don't get pulled into those things. Now, focus on the behavior, not labels. You should talk about what are the actions that they've done or can improve on, not about who they are. You could say something like, hey, like when a meeting kind of goes over, I noticed that you get really anxious. I would love to help you with that and try to figure it out. That kind of thing. You're not saying, hey, you absolutely suck at meetings. Like, that's not it. So the last thing is know your limits and what your resources are. You don't have to be the therapist here. You're not trying to be. But if you know somebody's in distress and they're really struggling, like talk to HR. Let them know, what's going on, and they can help you navigate that effectively. Maybe they can get plugged into an EAP or just some other thing. Obviously, if they're not in therapy, that would be a great option. But that's not your job. That's for HR to deal with if you guys have an HR. The whole point is to just encourage them and try to build them up, but have really good boundaries and not get sucked into the middle of the drama. At the end of the day, workplaces are full of these invisible battles that you can face. And sometimes the most challenging things are just signs of deep pain. You don't know what's really going on with that person. You can't control someone else's story. You can set the tone for really good empathy, good boundaries, and just have that support for your team. It's really important that you remember your worth and their worth. And that's never really a topic for debate. What you are in control of is being supportive and trying to make your workplace as healthy as you can. And that is what you can only control within yourself. But if everyone in the workplace can actually try to work towards that, then honestly, it can really be a more healthy atmosphere and environment. Anyways, I hope this video was helpful, educational. Again, I want to reemphasize and say that this is not to throw anyone that may have a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder under the bus, right? I am just trying to be helpful and just share some signs that people can look for, because at the end of the day, if they sort of know what they're looking for, then that can actually be better support for someone who has symptoms of BPD. So if you really resonated with this video, I would love to know. Please leave a comment below. You share whatever you feel called to share. But again, I would love to see you subscribe to the channel too, because I really love talking about topics of mental health and just different situations, and just being very real. Like, I'm not kind of trying to come from a clinical perspective here. I'm trying to come from a really just real, honest place. And I hope that resonates with some people. So anyway, hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching.